What do you need to know about cluster networking for exam AZ801? Well, for this part of the exam, if you're asked about it at all, it's just what are some in-box Windows Server features that can make your network run more efficiently? Because, as I mentioned in the previous module, high availability is about redundancy, isn't it? So, ideally, your cluster nodes have redundant hardware network interface cards, or NICs. If those NICs are fairly current, they should support RDMA, or Remote Direct Memory Access. That would allow those NICs to access remote storage almost as fast as the server can get to its own storage, you see? Now, we can combine RDMA compatible network interfaces with the server message block protocol. The SMB3 protocol and SMB Direct allow you to take advantage of that RDMA capability of your NICs. And again, in the name of file share in particular, accessing file data on shares using the SMB protocol can be very fast and efficient in terms of internode communications. Lastly, in Windows Server, we have NIC teaming, which is where you can create a logical network interface that actually maps to two or more physical interfaces. This allows you to do bandwidth bonding, which gives you increased throughput, but also gives you high availability at the network interface level, because if you lose a NIC due to a planned or unplanned outage, as long as you have at least one other network interface in the team that's available, then that server can continue to communicate. All right? So we could go beyond this. We really don't have to, though, but we want to think about things like multipath I/O and redundant connectivities. You might have multiple network paths. You might want to separate, for example, your storage network traffic, your cluster internal traffic, that is your heartbeat traffic, and then your data traffic. If you can do that, if you have the network infrastructure and the hardware to support that topology, all of those things are good because they increase the resiliency of your cluster, they increase the performance of your cluster, and give you as much high availability as you can get. Cluster workload options. All of this setup is well and good, but ultimately it comes down to, well, great, now that we have the failover cluster up and running and it's functional, what exactly can we do as far as making applications and services highly available? What is supported? Well, no surprise, many of the most common Windows Server roles are supported out of box for Windows Server clustering. The distributed file system, or DFS, you can make a DFS namespace highly available. This, again, it brings up the idea of redundancy, because if you know much about DFS, we cover DFS in great depth, by the way, in AZ800. DFS allows you to aggregate file shares from across your environment and create a single logical tree view of those shares. And you can replicate those shares, you can replicate your namespace. So it's nice that as an option, you can put your namespace in a failover cluster to give yet more high availability to it. File server is another built-in clustered role. This would be an active-passive file share. And then there's the scale-out file server, or SOFS option as well, for virtual machines and for SQL Server databases. You can take Hyper-V VMs themselves and make them highly available as cluster roles. You're using Hyper-V Replica to replicate virtual machines, and you want to replicate VMs that are in a cluster, then you'll want to have the replica broker. In fact, you'll need to have an instance of the replica broker as a clustered role. Dynamic host configuration protocol can be critical for a business whose endpoints receive their TCP/IP configurations dynamically. Again, this is one way. I mean, Microsoft's DHCP server does have its own failover capability, so I don't want to lead you down the path to think that there's only one solution to the problem of high availability. There really never is. Now, you'll see that in Windows Server failover clustering, there's a generic catch-all for generic app, script, or service. So this is to remind us that we're not limited only to the clustered roles that Microsoft gives us that it hosts, as you see on this slide. You can always make your own application, service, or script highly available by using the generic template in Failover Cluster Manager.